Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Airs for Architecture with me, Ambrose Gillick. I'm speaking today with architect Marie Galmstrup of Galmstrup Architects. We talk about her work and the way social and material context, ground in Anne-Marie's telling, forms the basis for her engagement in the tangible, the programmatic and the public, and militates against the cult of the empty vessel.
We spent so much time with the tangible, but the intangible is the one that actually make it specific, or how can I say, the sense of the place, or what would make you feel you belong to this place or feel that you could take part and go there, even if you're maybe not from across ages, across backgrounds, and all these different layers, right? And I think part of the secret to the intangible, but I think this kind of the buffer zone or the edge that you in master plan terms you would say, it's so important, right, for people to feel they belong, or that they can go there without being watched.
A is for Architecture, a podcast about architecture, buildings, urban culture and space.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Airs for Architecture. I'm with Anne-Marie Galmstrup. Anne-Marie, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Marie Galmstrup. I'm an architect based in London in a small practice here. We do a lot of culture and community work. I think that's it.
I think there's more to you than that. So I first met you in Venice at the Venice Biennale in 2018, and we immediately started talking about kind of issues, I think, around community and participation and urban regeneration and gentrification, and lots of key issues around that we see, I think, in Venice particularly, but issues that relate, I think, to the way that architecture is practiced. And I thought it would be lovely to speak to you, other than you being really nice to talk to, because I think you've got some really important insights into the way that architects operate in that community, participatory, and common knowledges kind of approach. And I think that would be a fascinating kind of area to talk about. So I wanted to know, I was watching that again this morning. I was watching that little short film you made for the Victoria and Albert Museum in your project Time for Play. And you use this really nice phrase that as an architect, you have to get there and it's about putting your hands in the ground and asking, how do things work here? And I wondered if we could start off by you kind of unpacking that a little bit. What do you mean by putting your hands in the ground? Is this a Danish expression?
It is actually a Danish expression. It's a literal translation. I think, right, so throughout my whole career, I've always worked in quite unfamiliar places, like in strange environments and cultures. So I'm kind of used to that. If you don't figure out how things work culturally, and I mean, it doesn't mean you're in another part of the world. It can also just be an institution that's completely different from other institution. So I think if you don't put your hands in the ground, if you don't figure out how things work, you don't get anywhere. And it's obviously also because the projects I've worked on mainly during my career has been cultural projects, right? It's cultural projects or bigger public projects. So you have these huge stakeholder groups you need to deal with and figure out how things work, basically. And so I think if you don't put your hands in the ground, if you don't figure out how to make things work in this place, then you're not getting anywhere with the projects you're doing. I think that's kind of one part of it, that physically, if you are to implement anything, and I'm also too way over ambitious thinking, I can change things, which, it's a bit silly, but you are, the other thing is the whole kind of, I would say, social part of it, which is probably something that comes with my Scandinavian roots, that if you want, as an architect, to make a better world, I know this sounds like huge and very kind of naive, but if you want, I think there is an element in what we do where we have a responsibility to make things better, right? And when you work with, again, cultural institutions or big public institutions, you have a huge, you can turn those dials, if that makes sense, right? I mean, you can, with what you create can have a huge impact on society on a completely different level. And if you don't understand how that user or people use that institution or use that city or use that place, well, then you're not doing anything, are you? I don't know, does that make sense? I mean,
yeah, it does. And actually, it's a really interesting idea that this word ground, I think for architectural students and people like that, it's very difficult to understand context in terms of the social and the program and the client. And I think that's what you're talking about, like particularly in these urban regeneration and cultural projects, really the ground is the people.
Yeah, and I think, fundamentally, architecture, what you create as an architect is not about you, it's for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Period. It's not about putting your piece out in the world. It's about what you're making, what would that make a difference for other people, right?
Mm.
So you need to look at what you can do. I think it's also,
What prepares us for that?
The basic. And then I think it comes back also to the asset and the significance of places, right? So, for example, we're working with the National Trust, some of Scotland, some of their absolutely amazing heritage sites. And we would never, there's a lot of that is about, well, don't do this, don't do that, what not to do, yeah? Because it's so strong places in themselves, but you need to get under the skin of what is that asset, what is the specifics that bring that forward, and that is particular for that place and not for another site. Yeah, mm-hmm. It's a little bit the same when you talk about museums and their collections, right? You want to it's about the collection. It's about the content, yeah. And it's about the program around that, right? So it's starting again with the operation of how a museum works, or with a heritage site, who are the visitors who come, when do they come, how do they get the best out of it, and what's the season of it? And then so there's kind of the parallel of operation together with the assets, or the significance of places. So I suppose a lot of what the last years we've been doing it's more, how can I say, it's more briefing strategies and briefings, and just kind of identifying or helping sometimes clients to see what they have, mm-hmm. In a way, and then as a foreigner, that you can ask all these questions, because you can ask the dumb questions, because you have no clue how things kind of evolved or
mm-hmm. But there is an element, and I suppose your operation, someone who from Denmark, living in London, working in Scotland, there is an assumption, I think, that there's a kind of series of universal values that you represent, that people can call you in and say, Anne-Marie, your insights correspond to a kind of series of, as I say, universal values. So you have the capacity as an architect to go into infinite number of environments, and using your skills, identify what is of value and how that might be best expressed architecturally, spatially, programmatically, which is quite interesting, isn't it? What prepares us for that as architects? In our training? What
prepares us? Yeah, and and it's interesting, because I was asked a similar question at a talk about engagement, and it's this kind of, what is engagement? And I think in the beginning, in the UK, I got it completely wrong, because for me, engagement is about speaking to people and figuring out how things work before you start drawing anything, right? Mm-hmm. So we would basically go on site and speak to the communities, yeah? Mm-hmm. And it would be both the ones that the client would recommend, but also the ones that then people on the ground would recommend. So that would be that's I don't know. I mean, it takes a lot of time, but that's kind of our approach, if that makes sense. And that's before you draw. Yeah, get all the information, and then you speak to people, you figure out how things are. Sorry, I forgot your question.
No, it was just thinking about this kind of this.
Because
this
I think
Go on.
Sorry. No, because I think the engagement, then people, I mean, there's this kind of public consultation, right? In the UK, where actually it's the architects who then showcase what they've already drawn to the public, and there's no, I mean, it's kind of a one-way communication. It's like, do you like it, do you not like it? It's a kind of subjective thing rather than actually, engaging.
Yeah.
and it's very, I mean, the client has already agreed and ticked off what they want. They just need to get the community's kind of tick boxes. So it's quite interesting with some of the projects we've done in the UK, where when we go out and speak to people to the communities, and they're like, so what are you going to do? I said, we don't know. We haven't drawn it yet. We're here to find out. They get really confused and really uncomfortable. Yeah. But that's the whole point, because then when you come back and they get, they're disappointed, you haven't drawn anything. I thought we were going to see something. It's like, yeah, but, we'll come back in a couple of months, but we just need to get this right. So I think, and that's the kind of, in a way, it's perhaps the old-fashioned way of being an architect, like really old-fashioned way and I think there's a lot of practices today who then, especially, sorry to say, some of the bigger ones, who hire in the young practices. So you can do the kind of engagement part, can't you? Yeah. And I think that's completely wrong. That is this kind of making engagement and consultancy that really gives the architect the escape route, right? Then they really don't have to deal with the community, right? They really don't have to learn about their users. They can just get, let's get this young practice to look at that, because that's what you do, isn't it? And I think it's far more interesting just to look at a very old-fashioned way, an architect who goes out and old-fashioned to look at what can we do here? What's going on?
I mean, I've been involved in projects which are even more in that role of being the kind of the instrument of participation. With absolutely no capacity to impact the design process, and really no feed into the client either, and you become sort of implicated in an immoral practice. So you insulate the actual building designers from moral criticism, and it's and I've been involved in projects which have done that very directly and unambiguously. It's exactly what they were intending would happen. So it is interesting, and it comes back to this idea of social good. You mentioned this idea of social good. The engagement, or talking to people, as they used to call it, is an
but not talking to, talking with.
Okay.
Sorry. You talk with people, right? You have conversations.
I actually talk at people, but anyway.
Yeah. No, but I think it's also, if you want a place to work, then that community, whether that is, again, the traditional sense of a community around a village or a museum who has a community of friends and groups of people, they don't take ownership of the place, then once you've gone, then what? And I had like an informal meeting a couple of months ago with some guys up in Scotland around the fish market project we're doing there. And it was based just kind of testing a group of local actors and say, listen, we'd like to do this with the public realm around the building. Is that something perhaps, because I know you guys are key actors, within the community from certain angles, and that could be really, really useful. And I said it straight out, listen, we're building this and then we're going away. Yeah, I don't live here. You live here. You have to live with this thing. So I'm wondering if you would like, we're happy to put some resources in to take this. We're talking about a sea garden between these pavilions that we're doing, and see if you could involve some young people to do something temporarily there. But it would also be a great catalyst for them actually to just take ownership of the place, right? And then,
I mean, it's a really interesting idea. And I mean, one of the things that's built into the idea of a profession, and I've been looking at this recently because I was doing my PGCHE qualification, which I got. Amazing. Yeah. And one of the characteristics of a profession is actually to be socially good. I mean, one of the interesting ones in architecture is that you have to make things beautiful as well, which I really like. That is part of our actual professional responsibility to make beautiful things. But I wondered if you would like to talk about that fish market project in Eyemouth that you've recently. It's not breaking ground yet, is it? But the old fish market has been demolished now. Is that right?
The old fish market has been demolished, and we have just finished the tender. So we're hoping within the next couple of months we will get on site.
Do you want to talk about how that process of that in relation to some of these themes that you've talked about, of like what you actually did in Eyemouth to foreground the design work that you eventually did? Because one of the things that really strikes me is that in the way that you're talking, obviously we could use the word sustainable, which is one of those kind of nebulous, meaningless words now, but compare it to that project, was it the Guggenheim Museum that was proposed for Oslo by Parisian architects, that was voted down by the
Finland.
It was in Finland, Helsinki. That's right, and it was really cool. And then actually, because I'm guessing there was no sense of buy-in, also because it's in a period of austerity, spending 50 million quid or whatever it was on a museum for that kind of stuff doesn't seem particularly right. But I wonder whether there is a way of sort of, well, if you could sort of explain what you do based around this project, so that kind of people have a clearer idea of what this looks like. I mean, you don't simply walk around with a clipboard saying, "Hi, can I talk to you about?"
No, and I think first of all, I wish we could have done a lot more engagement and involved a lot more of the community in that project. But obviously, we were up against COVID, and a completely horrific time frame for that project. However, I think one of the things that I'm quite pleased with that the client was brave enough to take forward were that instead of us looking only at the plot of land where the footprint of the existing fish market, we looked at the whole harbour front. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we took it into an urban context, talking about how the project can be this catalyst for the old town, so the old town conservation area, the whole thing, which is, it's being diluted by all the big institutions. It's the classic thing. Yeah, you got the old towns, and then you put all your primary schools and big public institutions a little bit in the outskirts between two towns. Yeah, so you're completely taking all the life out of the old high street, right? Mm-hmm. So hopefully, that was kind of where we started, and then obviously, this is an industrial harbour, right? It's a working harbour, but it's also changing. It's there is a decline in fishing, so there's also a change in what is a marine economy. Yeah, mm-hmm. Many things that can also be a visitor economy, right? So there's huge changes going on, right? And I think what we wanted to do were to connect the old town with the harbour again. Yeah, and it was very interesting because we were obviously being the retrofit, and we must keep some of the existing structures, and the moment I put my foot on the ground the first time in Eyemouth, everybody's like, "Can you just take it down?" This kind of, we just want to just take it away. Yeah, we want the view, we want the openness. So that was like, right, that, and there was actually nothing kind of there was anything to retrofit really. And I think, sorry, just a long story short, by looking at the whole harbour front, and then instead of doing one building, doing another wall, so to speak, towards the harbour, then the idea was to have an urban approach. So we basically did a master plan first. We were not asked to do, but what we thought was good for the project. And then a series of pavilions along the harbour rather than just one big building. So one move. And what that does, I think, on a social level is that you get all this in between. You have, first and foremost, you have the promenade towards the harbour. So you get the kind of, what do you say, the see and be seen walking kind of situations, which people do, yeah, up onto the beach, up on the harbour and out. And then between the buildings, you get the linger space, right? So that's where you can sit and linger, and the young people can hang out and have a space. The elder people can sit on a bench and watch that. So in terms of the social good or healthy society, active citizens, well, you don't, by having the winter gardens on the ground floor, you can sit between the pavilions and still see what's going on inside the pavilions, even if you're not part of it, but you are part of it. And I think that's one of the, how can I say, superpowers of public realm, isn't it? That you don't have to physically take part, but you are part of a part of society. You're not, yeah. So yeah, I think, yeah, so it's that this social good. I hope that there will, the urban realm will bring some social sustainability to the place.
Yeah.
And all kind of economy, instead of inviting Costa's Coffee to run the whole thing, then actually speaking to the business owners but there's so many food and beverage outlets on Harbour Road. So speaking to them and see what could be of use for them.
I like this idea. This is an idea, again, going back to that video about time for play, and you talking about how at the Museum of Childhood, which is in Shoreditch, it's Bethnal Green. You took some of that interiority of the architecture of the program that you were putting in that building, and you brought it out into the street to kind of diffuse the boundary between the realm of the architect, which is the building, and the realm of the citizen, which is the street, and in a way the realm of the planner, which is the street as well. And I really thought that was a very lovely way. And what you're saying about this IMouth project as well has that same kind of quality, where there's a conscious effort to sort of, I suppose, puncture the skin, as you say, puncture the skin of the buildings to make their social program affect an urban program and vice versa.
I think the Fish Market project, I sometimes describe it as it's a community hall, but all the corridors are outside. And if you want to book a room, you take one of the pavilions, right? Yeah, and then I'm again, I suppose, from a lot of the public institutions we have a lot. They're in the prime spots of our cities, and they have a lot of exterior area, which is either, it was just, if you take museums, this was the time, right, where the windows are a little bit too high to look inside, the stairs a little bit too steep for normal people, because it was it has to be a bit hard to reach, right? It was for a certain group of people, and I think that's not how it is today, right? We can't really just lower the staircase or the windows just as such, but right outside there are grounds, there are space, there's a threshold between the street and the gallery that is completely unused in so many instances, and would have huge fences around them. And yes, I know there's security and there's a lot of, but it's just a missed opportunity, isn't it? People do not have to go into the museum to be parts of it, right? You can just have a clock tower or the waterfall or other things where you can learn from, or the billboard. We're working with a museum in Denmark, which we did a proposal for the monastery museum for them. And then they said, we are moving up to the train station in an existing building. Could you have a look at that? Which was really interesting because it's a museum, a city museum, moving into a 1980s great box right next to the train station.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, the synergy you can get out of that, right? While you're waiting. I mean, so obviously the first thing were to kind of call the lobby is the waiting room, right? And yeah, I mean, so you kind of, again, the thresholds between the public and the museum, and then putting all the workshops out right in the front. So the back of house became the front of the house. And then slowly you can pay your way into an exhibition because, you need to earn, to earn money from something. And, how can the local archive become the, what do you say? What do you call it? Like, how to do this? Sorry, I'm translating in my head now because we this Danish word, so this so long. But, how can, and around that project, actually, what we did were, so with Imagination, which is a non-profit that I'm running together with Robin on the side, we invited 10 young professionals from all over the world to come to Skanderborg, which is kind of a town, the outskirts in Denmark. And together with 20 high school students, we basically moved into the post office, which was there like at the time, for 10 days and did an exhibition together with the students. So basically co-created, put up an exhibition through the 10 days around 5 atmospheres that the young people would like to see in the future in their city museum. So this and that came about from exactly sitting in a meeting room, talking about people. Yeah. And we're a bit like, well, we're sitting in a meeting room, talking strategically about what you would like this place to be. Why don't we talk with the young people and actually, bring them inside while we're doing this, instead of afterwards going out and doing a workshop? And those 10 days gave us so much. Yes, both as an architect being in the building, but also from all the feedback and their thoughts about what will be interesting for them. And then the museum, it was like all these people, whether it was the young people or their parents, who'd never been there before, who had a connection all of a sudden to the place, right? So I think that's socially good, no?
Yeah.
A little bit far from like the traditional architecture, but I think architects are also a little bit. Can I be a bit critical about the UK architects?
Yeah, go on. I love it.
No, but I think one thing I noticed when I moved back here, after being away for quite a few years, where you open any magazine or website and it's building, yeah? Mm-hmm. Like, how does this relate to the public realm? I mean, it was very kind of, you work within your plot, right? And then after coming back and working here for some years, I know why, because the whole planning system is completely separated for who does the framework, right? And the schools, you have building architects completely separated from urban planners or from landscape architects, right? Mm-hmm. This kind of cross-disciplinary integration you don't get in the school system and you don't get in the professional life, so you don't have to deal with. I mean, it's just too compartmentalized in a way. So I think so that takes away from how can I say, from actually thinking, how can you say, the whole, not holistically, but thinking the whole cycle of from a more kind of urban perspective. What is it that you're, just zooming out from a bit of a broader perspective.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna question something that you said, which is this idea that these old museums with their high windows and their 2 steep steps, and they're exclusive and they're designed to keep people out. Have the demographics of people who go to museums really changed? And no, that's not a question for you, but what I wonder, and this is again back to this role of architecture, or the architect or designers, or however you want to phrase it, Is it just what we're doing here, a sort of process of gentrification, where we're kind of taking over, say, for example, in your fish market project, we're taking over a site of working class identity, like genuine indigenous working class, deep culture, whatever way you want to put it. And we're turning into a kind of space of consumerism, which is going to be great for Londoners going on holiday, and Edinburgh people going on holiday. But in terms of the people from Eyemouth or wherever it is, see this with, say, for example, the V&A in Dundee, where you have a kind of building, without wishing to be too critical, it doesn't actually bear any relationship to the community and isn't fundamentally intended to. It's fundamentally a nodal point in neoliberal capitalist consumer culture. And I wonder whether, so that's very strong words, for which I'm not meaning to apply them directly to this project, but I do wonder whether there is this kind of issue at stake, which is something that architects, again, certainly in Britain don't address, which is that they are implicated in processes of gentrification through these very well-meaning and extremely well-designed, beautiful, perhaps really competently programmed and engaged projects. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that, like the thing that you're doing at Fingal's Cave. Isn't that just a way of precipitating more tourism? Isn't that just turning this beautiful, exquisite piece of nature into an object for consumption?
We're not doing work at Fingal's Cave, but we are doing work in Stafford.
Sorry, Stafford.
Right. So where do we start?
These are moral questions, and I don't know if architecture really has. I do wonder whether architecture has a moral identity at all. And I sometimes think about 3 years ago, I got to the point thinking about participation, thinking, why are we trying to do this? Architecture is not a device for ethics. It's just ornaments.
Well, I mean, I think it comes back to, again, a little bit the master plan and the program of projects. Because I think one of the things if you take an urban approach or more of a master plan approach, well, sometimes you do want somebody that has a bit of a character, like the Dundee or somebody that has a bit more character, that actually draw people in to get the economy restarted. Yeah. And what it can also do is that it can attract some people, perhaps some younger people who, the fish market, for example, I don't think it's a secret that we wanted to do little accommodation pots, like small glamping pots on the first floor, because then we could attract perhaps young couples from Edinburgh or Newcastle, and who knows, maybe they would want to then restart a family in Eyemouth, which is really, the decline in young people in that area is ridiculous. They all disappear, right? So I think you need to look a little bit broader at it. What some of these kind of more catalyst projects can do. Mean that we should, fill our cities with wacky, crazy, sculptural things, whatever. You need to make sure that the program works around it and make sure it's not too big for where it is, and that it's you rather have a small active place than a too big and empty space, right? And you would need to kind of be, again, from a master plan and program what would be beneficial, what would work, what sizes, what scale, again, would work for people renting out these spaces and using these spaces. So I'm sorry, I'm going a bit off.
No, I think you're answering the question really. I think you're answering the question really clearly, and I think you're right. I spoke to a Scandinavian architect a while ago, a few years ago, who talked about good gentrification versus bad gentrification, and you see a lot of projects which do gentrification that are pretty grim. They're designed to exclude fundamentally. Or to consume they're designed to consume poverty. In a way, that's what's going on. Like what one is talking about in gentrification, generally speaking, is the instrumentalization of aesthetic poverty for not poor people. But I think what you're talking about, and the way you're describing it, is to describe something that's using the same principles, drawing in more money, drawing in younger people, or hopefully retaining some young people. Using design, using these kind of, by pepper potting beautiful things within it, and then thinking about it in a broader social and urbanistic sense, so I do understand what you're saying. I think it's very clear.
Yeah, I mean, draw people back to the harbour front, right?
Mm-hmm.
Draw them back, because that's going to attract. That's going to have a lot of, what do you call it? I forgot the word now. What do you say? You get like a side effect economically for the businesses in on the high, right? So you are helping them by bringing people down to the harbour front. They might not buy something in the fish market, but they will go to Jagopatsi or to the Woodfront Cafe or the baker on the high street, right? So it doesn't become this, they will go eat somewhere else perhaps, or So there's a kick-off effect on some of these. I think so helping not to kind of dilute what you have. And then there's this thing about also just highlight to people what they have sometimes, right? Because it's so easy. For example, with eye mouth, so there's flooding. So there's things you can't do because there's 1 in 200 years there's a flooding. Well, does that mean then that we can't, build? People can't live there because and then you're completely diluting it because every 200 years, instead of working around that, and and just helping, kind of pointing out kind of what is significance to and sometimes it's sometimes a little bit easier to say that as a foreigner coming in with eyes looking at it. I mean, in IMAP, they had it all sorted out. So through the conversations with different people, we got a whole bunch of, they're already vision for IMAP. I mean, they already have community groups who's been sitting for years and putting the vision together, what they want to do. So, I mean, and I'm like, well, we're not here to, I want to learn from that. I'm not trying to fix it. Yeah. And are we then getting more people to some of these kind of heritage sites? It's not about, I think, well, I think if you look at the pictures of Staffa, and you look at the staircase, which has concrete that's been there for 40 years. And with this, I don't think there's any harm in putting in a new staircase. I mean, to make it a little bit more safe.
No, for sure. I think that one of the things that I'm sort of getting, so this idea of the way that you've articulated this project at IMouth and perhaps the project at Staffa as well, there's a kind of idea of framing behavior, like architecture as a device for precipitating or making certain activity more likely to occur, more certain forms of social activity, as you say, old people sitting and watching young people gathering and so on and so forth, which I think is a really beautiful, a really beautiful device as well. And then also framing common behaviors, like common commercial behaviors, like the baker and the use of the baker and going to the local cafe and stuff like that. So it's very clear, I think, what you're saying. I've been reading this really great book recently, which I don't know if you know of, The Beauty of Everyday Things by Saetsu Yanagi. And there is that kind of quality about it. And he talks in that book about beauty. And I think your work has this quality about it as well. And I wondered if you would like to talk about what you see. And I think this is a conversation we've had before, perhaps when we first met, what you see as the role of the architect. Once all of this community engagement is done, once all of the client groups, that dreadful hydra that is community, once all of that's been gathered together, we still have a job to do, which is to make something that does the things that it needs to do, but isn't just a shed.
Yeah, and that's where that, having those conversations up front also means you're doing all the research, isn't it? Yeah. So, and I mean, we've been extremely privileged to work on cultural projects. Yeah, have a lot of in settings that has so much history and so much asset, right? You know, so yeah. I mean, it's just a huge privilege to be able to work with collections and heritage places. I think the whatever. I mean, you do that research also, to figure it out. But I think it also mentally, as an architect, then you start thinking, so they're using stone here, so we should probably no, but that's a lightweight, and so maybe it's a timber, So I think slowly, but maybe it's more about the connection to the harbour and the connection to the warehouses of stone. So it's more about the boats and the timbers, and So I think all these things kind of, they just kind of mentally fall into place, yeah. Of when you're doing that research and when you're speaking to people.
But then you still have to make an aesthetic move.
You have to make an aesthetic move, and that's our job, isn't it? Yes.
That's quite an interesting moment.
But it starts again from inside, doesn't it? Because it starts with the program. Yeah. So for example, again, back to iMouth, we did a 2-story building, right? And like, that's high. Yeah, but it means you'll get the double of floor space for open public space, right? And you get a bit of semi-privacy for those pots, whether then originally we were thinking as accommodation, but it will be, small rental studios, right? So I think your program also often determines, the massing or the concept of what you do. And then I suppose I don't know, I haven't really thought about this. I suppose that's a creative process, isn't it? I mean, you get informed by the things you see where you do the research, and then all of a sudden it just makes sense, this is definitely timber, this is definitely stone, or no, it should be a big roof, or to definitely keep this open. I think those are, I suppose this is what we do as designers, isn't it?
Well, yes and no, surely, because if you look at Kuma's thing in Dundee, which has got a similar setting to yours and a similar social kind of context to your project in iMouth, it would be very, very surprising. I don't know if you visited that building. It would be very surprising if there was significant consideration in the design process of that building that corresponded in any way to what you've described. That building, as far as I can see, was a building that started with the principle of a design aesthetic, the architect's design aesthetic, and then reverse engineered a kind of program within it. And you see that a lot with cultural buildings. The Museum of Transport in Glasgow is a really good example, a building that doesn't really seem to correspond to the program. Or the Glasgow School of Arts Stephen Hall building, which likewise didn't really, and I don't, that's very damaged. I went to see it recently. It's very damaged at the moment, but there is a kind of complete mismatch, actually. So for some architects, I think the aesthetic thing. So what I wonder is, does your 2-story decision at iMouth actually involve you sitting down and drawing it and going, we need it to be about 10 meters high for it to look right here. Let's put 2 floors in it, rather than we need 2 floors. It has to be 10 meters high.
No, iMouth came from the idea of having more ground floor space, basically giving more public ground back, and then having a viewing platform or having something at a higher level that would make come up. And then also I think the whole pavilion story. But going back to what you said about, right, so I think that time is over of drawing big empty vessels. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of empty vessels all over the world when I was working for a very big company globally, and I'm just not interested in doing that any longer. Yeah, I'm not interested in drawing museums in the middle of nowhere where there's no collection, because then who are the people who's going to be using it? Or drawing huge museums in places where you're like, well, you already have 4 or 5, museums, and you have how many people visiting here every year? I mean, how on earth are you going to operate this, and why? Yeah. I mean, who is this for? Yeah, because you obviously don't, and you're not interested in what to say, using the community or kind of having them have a normal relationship to your institution. So it just makes no sense. So I think it's back to the program. And I think if there's something that positive that COVID has done, I think a lot of communities become a lot stronger, a lot of neighborhoods become a lot stronger. So I think it's something that I think going forward that we as architects are more observant about or yeah.
I think that's a really good point. I really like this idea that the way that you pursue design in a kind of socially engaged, socially just way is about helping clients articulate a sort of right and proper, or no, what do you call it, a normal relationship to the institution, and that these rather extraordinary and flamboyant pieces of architecture, millennium architecture, really, aren't they? They're kind of the stuff that was done around the millennium and has been running for 20 years since, but is actually a way I suppose, of creating a barrier between the values of an institution and the values of the community in which the building sits. It sort of creates a them and us thing, doesn't it? I live in Margate at the moment, and we have this what do you call it, beachfront museum, which in a way really does operate in that way. It creates, using a kind of esoteric and over-designed aesthetic, creates a barrier between the town and itself.
Mm.
And I really like the way that what you're proposing in Eyemouth and in some of the other work that you display on your onlines. There's a clear attempt to integrate the aesthetics, the visual qualities, the spatial forms, and you explained that really beautifully about Eyemouth, about the new place in Eyemouth. That you're actually helping the institutions integrate themselves into their own communities better, which is inevitably going to be more sustainable, I think. It's inevitably going to lead to a more positive social effect, and therefore the thing will work better.
I think another thing is this thing about the semi-public and the semi-private, yeah, which it is not, it's not public-private.
Mm.
Yeah? So I think the traditional kind of shapes of our cities were public-private, right? Mm-hmm. And the museums public-private, yeah. Whereas this, if you take the typical housing block in Copenhagen, for example, you would have your semi public also in the back in the courtyard, or semi-private, sorry, where all the residents around in that block would have access to a shared courtyard. So it's still a protected place for the kids to go down and play without, in a safe environment, and with their friends. And then your hallway, and there's all these studies of how many people you can stack in one hallway, and more than 20 people, you lose the sense of community, and all these kind of statistics. But that hallway also means you meet your neighbor, you don't have your own entrance, so there is some kind of semi-public frontage, so to speak. And I think that's we're lacking a lot. We need to be very careful that we don't lose. Yeah? Mm-hmm. When we gentrify places, that we don't kind of all the kind of quirkiness, because if you scrape out all of that and just make one big plaza, they want a park, give them a huge park. Mm. Well, nobody is going to feel comfortable in a big, huge park, because they want, some people want to have a smaller place to linger and feel secure. So I think this kind of understanding right. So when we do the summer school, then we use the word intangible a lot. Yeah. So what is the intangible? And it's great to put that word out in front of students, because they're like, intangible? And then they spend the next 2 hours Googling and figuring out what that means. Yeah. Which is great. because we spent so much time with the tangible, but the intangible is the one that actually make it specific. Or how can I say, the sense of place, or what would make you feel you belong to this place, or feel that you could take part and go there, even if you're maybe not from, across ages, across backgrounds, and all these different layers, right? And I think part of the secret to the intangible is this kind of one thing is obviously we need to be careful not to completely segregate all our our neighborhoods. Sorry, I'm just rambling here now, but I think this kind of the buffer zone or the edge that you in master plan terms you would say, it's so important, right? For people to feel they belong, or that they can go there without being watched, but they can hide,
without a really strong consciousness that they're transgressing some threshold that either limits or isn't for them, permits or not permits. I think that's a really
that, and then the whole maturing sites, like when you're doing that you spent in between phases of projects, then mature the site, test things, try out things, So we have hopefully, I hope that we will get this going in IMAP with the Sea Guard, and that obviously we can't afford to build everything in one go. This will be developed in phases. But I hope in between these phases that then we can kind of mature the site. Maybe that's not the right word.
That's a nice word, I think.
That you can kind of figure out, so what actually would make people, that the community can start taking a very informal, straightforward ownership to it. You can put up a marquee and see if will it work if we have a big party, or will that just not go down? Or will it work if we put in some playthings, or just be a little bit more free with and test things. But again, it's back to money. There's very little resources because then why would we do that? Because then we're going to be taking it away again. That's waste of money. But you have no idea what you on a social level will gain from it. So I think there's different ways of looking at spendings. Sorry.
No, that's a really brilliant answer. Really, really interesting. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I did want to know about this. I did want you to perhaps ruminate a wee bit on this idea of play, because you seem to have this, I think there's a playfulness in the way that you're talking about urban space, building space, the permeation of the two, the boundaries of the two. And obviously when we think about play, we generally speaking think about BMXs, parkour and skating, and then large scale kind of festivals type events. But I wondered if there was something more to it in the way that you're thinking about it. You talked about these intangible things. You talked about creating a more synthetic social space, not ghettoizing people, not creating boundaries. Is that all part of, is that how we might appreciate play in the urban realm? Or is play simply hopscotch?
No, I think play is a lot more than hopscotch, and I think the play has become extremely structured. Right? So this this thing about running over a field, jumping from a chair, or has become like everything has to have rules, and it's very sports, right? And games, and it's like it's become very structured, right? So I think when it comes to play, I'm very much for the kind of the process, or that there's room for failure, there's room for learning from play, there's room for just sparking some curiosity and being interested. There are no rules, and it's all about failure. Imagination, the summer schools we're doing, it's all about learning from each other, and kind of and the process of that, and the co-creation of that. And for me, that's very playful, or that is play. So I think play is not about playgrounds, right? Play is about being engaged and staying curious and make people curious. I mean, so play could also be, I mean, again, in IMAF, we're talking about, well, why don't we put pavers down with all the boat names, right? So, you know, boats have these kind of 2 letters and some numbers, right? You know, so then people can have a little think about that, right? So what's that? And you can, I don't know, maybe you'll start using it as play scots, you know, because they're, I mean, I think there's so many ways that play and how you see the city and that you can kind of spark, so it's not more playgrounds.
I think you do see that in older, you know, in our built heritage, in our urban heritage, quite clearly.
Yes.
And the articulation of the landscape in, say, Victorian cities is actually something to do with what I suppose in sociology is called performativity, this idea of creating spaces in which people get to represent themselves as they want to represent themselves within obviously the broader socioeconomic cultural factors, but there is a kind of permissiveness there, which as we become more confined and rule bound, and as you say, turning play into sport, which is a nightmare. It is a nightmare, isn't it?
No, not everybody's interested in that.
Well, it was really interesting watching the Olympics, and they had the BMXing in the Olympics for the first time, and they'd taken something that was genuinely extraordinary and exciting and turned it into something that was so boring, like totally banal. And I thought, there we go. There goes another good thing. But I really like this. Go on.
Yeah, no, because I think that you were asking in the beginning about the whole V&A thing. So I mean, my approach were, right. So when Sir Henry Cole, when he started the museum, I mean, the V&A was all about learning, right? It's all about a pattern book for good design, and he reinstated the gallery of the false principle. So things not to do, do not do this at home because it's bad design. It's like, who is that to tell? You know, who is it? What's bad and what's good? So that residency actually kicked off by saying, so the gallery of failures. I'm just going to make a gallery where this is about making mistakes, because that's a process we go through as architects, isn't it? Yeah, you do a little quirky model, and then you said that's not really working, is it? But let's do another one. So you kind of, this process you're going through to you learn from your mistake, you kind of you build on it, right? And that's the room we need to have. And I think, and I mean, play again. I mean, it's interesting how there's this kind of, I think a lot of the younger generation today is so always a little bit afraid of making mistakes, and a little bit of everything has to be so picture perfect. And I don't know if it's a mobile phone, social media kind of thing, that everything has to be perfect, right? And it was interesting, actually, at the V&A, there's an exhibition, I don't know if it's still on, about clubbing and the whole clubbing culture. And there was an excellent video in the back about a guy who was talking about all the rave parties and how that whole kind of no mobile phones, no nothing, but there was this sense of, we're part of this. Part of this group, and it's this intangible moment of dancing with 100 other people, right? And these teenagers he was conveying and showing, he was given the whole history of clubbing in the UK. It was brilliant. Go watch it. It was brilliant. It was the best thing about it.
This is Cole, did you say? Whose video is this?
No. This was it's I can't remember the guy who did it. It's on display at the V&A at the moment at the back. It's a guy he's giving a lecture to a group of high school students, South London or something. Okay. About clubbing.
Yeah.
The whole kind of history of that. But what was interesting is that they were all with no mobile phones, no kind of I'm not sharing this with the kind of this. We lost a little bit. I mean, both you and I grew up with kind of clubbing, and you have this sense of being part of something bigger. Yeah. But
it was just amazing. Yeah.
And I think we lost this a little bit. So now it's about, I think, this picture perfect things that has to be documented in a picture and shared, and then everybody gets, I mean, we know how, teenagers are getting, all these kind of issues because they're not perfect, right? Because we're only being portrayed with all the perfect things in the world, right? So we need to get some of this informality and normality and just being together and having that meal, and it doesn't have to document it, and I don't know what architecture can do, but I mean, I'm sure we can do something,
I think that's a beautiful point to finish on, and I think a lot of what you said actually points towards answers already. That we create spaces that frame and permit informality, as you use it. It's a lovely word, informality. Permit the everyday, permit the mundane activities that make up joyful lives, rather than that kind of that calibrated and scored sportification of everyday life. The judgment that comes with that as well, I think, has been so.
It's also just really, really boring, right? I mean, all the things you're not allowed to do. You can't drink, you can't eat meat, you can't do, there's all things that it's banned. Yeah, you can't smoke. You can't. Boring is that?
You can't make mistakes because it will get documented, posted on social media, and you won't get a job.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's true. No, all of those wonderful things that I think your architecture is meat and drink and clubbing and all of these great things. And I'm really grateful for you spending so much time and sharing it and describing it and thinking about it with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that's all, folks. Thanks for listening. Thanks, of course, to Anne-Marie for her most excellent chat. Please have a look in the podcast description for links to her practice and professional profiles. Watch Anne-Marie's work online, of course. And don't forget to like, subscribe, follow and share A is for Architecture with all your chums and lovers. Cheers.